Just taking detour from queries, we have now Ms. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, who's the chairperson of Biocon Group, joining us this morning. Very good morning to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us on ET Now. And let's talk about the big headline. I wanted to understand, how do we actually assess the impact of the US drug pricing reforms, especially on global pharmaceutical supply chain, as well as for Indian exports?
If you heard President Trump, it is very clear that he's targeting big pharma. And basically, he's talking about the big differential that exists between European and US prices. And he has basically called out a few examples. And what he is seeking is equalizing of drug pricing between developed countries and the US. He has clearly exempted developing countries from what he is seeking. Moreover, I think he's talking about focusing on affordability. In fact, Robert Kennedy, the HHS secretary, also emphasized the need for affordability. And as far as I'm concerned, I think Indian generics and biosimilars in general are shielded from what Trump, plans to do. Now, when it comes to Medicare and Medicaid, as you know, they were in a very difficult position where they could only negotiate on a certain number of drugs. He wants to extend it to all drugs. But really, the main price differential that exists between Europe and US makes it very, important for the US government to see how they can rein in drug pricing. And this is a very low-hanging fruit as far as they are concerned.
Ma'am, this is Snehi also joining in. Help us understand if these price caps primarily target big pharma, or do you believe generics and biosimilars could also feel the heat?
Generics and biosimilars address the concern around drug pricing. They are products that actually bring down drug prices. So I don't see why there is confusion in your mind about drug pricing and tariffs. Tariffs are very different. Drug pricing is really aimed at the huge differential that lies between proprietary drug products, which big pharma controls. And if you did hear to the announcement by Trump and his team, it clearly talks about wanting to equalize this difference, this differential. So I don't think you should keep harping on drug prices without understanding the fact that clearly the aim is to equalize drug pricing of novel proprietary drugs between Europe and the United States, which is really their main contention.
Wanted to understand what are the biggest opportunities, as well as if you could help us understand or outline the headwinds that could be facing, or that the Indian biotech sector could face over the next 5 years or so.
We have seen a very strong adoption of our biosimilars by the US market, by the European market, and in most emerging markets where we operate. As far as the US is concerned, we have seen a more than doubling of market share for our oncology products, particularly pegfilgrastim, which saw a 30% market share this quarter, and of course trastuzumab, which saw a 26% market share this quarter. This is a very significant growth from last fiscal. Secondly, I think we are seeing a huge demand of insulins. I think insulins is going to be a windfall for us, because you're clearly seeing both the insulin companies indicating that they would like to phase out from insulins into GLP1s. And this obviously opens up a very large opportunity for us as the third largest insulin producer. And fortunately, we've just doubled our capacity in Malaysia, which will become operational later this year.
Okay, ma'am, and also help us understand how significant is the GLP1 market opportunity for India, both in terms of innovation and manufacturing. What headroom can we see for growth on this front?
So as you know, we basically sold our branded formulations business to Eris Pharma, who's very upbeat on the GLP-1 opportunity. We are, going to obviously uh, be able to supply large quantities of GLP-1s for the Indian market as well. But as you know, there are huge opportunities in other markets as well, where it is difficult for many Indian players to get regulatory approvals. So I believe that we will have a very, very significant global market share in emerging markets starting late next year. So I think that's what we're really, really banking on. As far as India is concerned, of course, it's going to be an important market. There is going to be quite a few players in India, but we believe we have a very, very good position across the emerging markets.
Right. And where do you see this biggest breakthrough from AI, especially when you talk about drug discovery and development? If you could help us understand how big a disruption could we be staring at?
I think AI has been very overhyped in terms of what it is doing in every sector. In the pharma sector, of course, everyone is looking at the adoption of AI in whichever area they can. I think manufacturing is certainly looking at AI to improve efficiency. Uh, in terms of review processes, it's going to help a lot. In terms of basically documentation, it helps a lot. In terms of speeding up your various processes, it makes a big difference. I think where AI is really helping is really in areas of medicine where there is a lot of use of AI in the radiology and path lab areas where you get very accurate diagnosis of scans and X-rays in a matter of minutes. I think that's where the most use of AI is. In terms of drug discovery, certainly there is going to be a huge adoption of AI going forward. But at this point in time, I think AI is something that most companies are using for operational excellence.
Okay, and ma'am, before we let you go, also help us understand India's positioning in terms of competitiveness with the rest of the world, because as other nations are scaling up in biotech, how is India positioning itself to stay globally competitive? If you could give us some color on that as well?
So I think we do have a dominant share of generics, but I think where China plays its bit is, of course, we are very dependent on Chinese APIs. I think the government needs to focus on bringing API manufacturing to India, even if it is at a certain cost. That's where we really need to subsidize Indian industry. But having said that, in terms of developing generics, I think Indian companies have become very, good at it. I think Indian companies are playing a very dominant role in generics globally, and I think we should continue to focus on our strengths in developing generics for global markets. I think speed to market is going to be very important. And I think building scale is going to be very important. And I think in many of these, India has both.
All right, Ms. Shaw, we leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us in ET Now to talk about Biocon, the landscape that we have for the Indian pharmaceutical sector, and what's the way forward. Thank you so much. Pleasure having you on this edition of Buy Now, Sell Now.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.